So, the Orville Season 3 comes out in just a couple weeks, so I thought I would take this opportunity to recap and review the first two seasons because it feels like they came out forever ago, and I love this show, and I want to talk about it. So, we're going to go episode by episode, starting with the first episode of Season 1 called Old Wounds. So the episode opens with Ed Mercer, played by Seth MacFarlane, walking in on his wife, Kelly Grayson, having sex with a blue alien, played by Rob Lowe. And Ed Mercer storms off and has a bit of a crisis for a year, after which he's pulled into a meeting with Victor Garber playing an admiral. And the admiral says, "We've got a command available for you if you want it on a ship called the Orville, a mid-level exploratory vessel," and Ed is thrilled. He's been having a bit of a rough time for the past year with the crisis with his wife, and the Admiralty has been a bit standoffish about offering him a higher position, but they've finally been convinced to do so. So Ed takes the position and recommends for helmsman his good friend Gordon Malloy. And then we meet Gordon, who is having a holodeck simulation where he's battling this ogre-like creature, which is a very funny scene. And then we're taken on board the Orville, where we meet the senior staff. First up, we have Alara Katan, who's chief of security, and she's a species called a Selayan. And on her planet, they have very high, intense gravity, so in most circumstances, she's got enhanced strength. But she's very young, which Captain Mercer's a little bit taken back by at first. And then we meet Navigator Lieutenant John Lamar, who's a sort of fun, laid-back, casual guy, and asks if we can have soda on the bridge. Then we meet Bortus, who's a Moclan, which is an all-male species, who only urinate once a year, which is a setup for a gag that has a payoff way further down the line. We meet Dr. Clara Finn, who's played by Penny Johnson-Gerald, who is a alum of Star Trek, who is on Deep Space Nine. And finally, we have Isaac, who's the sort of Spock character, the science officer, who's a robot. He's a species called Kaylon, and the Kaylons are notoriously sort of isolationist and racist species, which Captain Mercer makes a point about. And Isaac says that the reason he's here is because the Planetary Union, which is the equivalent of the United Federation of Planets, said, if any Kaylon want to join in, learn a little bit about us, we can sort of enhance relationships, come on over. So Isaac is here to fill that role. But there's also the issue of a first officer. Mercer does not have a first officer, so the Admiralty assures them that'll happen soon. They take off towards this research station to deliver supplies on a planet called Epsilon 2, and on their way they find out that an XO is available, but that XO is Kelly Grayson, Commander Kelly Grayson, Ed's ex-wife. Of course, Ed is not so happy about this, so they go and pick her up, and they have a very, very good sit down and discuss the whole situation, which is obviously very uncomfortable for them and for their crew, but they're professionals, so they'll put it aside. And they show up on Epsilon 2, and a guy named Dr. Aronoff, who's played by an actor who I recognize from many things. Dr. Aronoff tells them they don't actually need supplies. They need their assistance for something else. So the senior staff go down to the surface to meet Dr. Aronoff. They're taken around the facility, the laboratory, a fun little scene, quirky little gags here and there, and something set up with redwood seeds, which is important later on. But Dr. Aronoff shows them this crazy device that they had developed, which is a temporal device that can speed up time in an isolated area, which of course could be weaponized, Laura points out, and which is the reason why Dr. Aronoff called the Orville, because they need protection from the Krill, which is essentially the Klingons of this universe. So one of the scientists at the facility reveals himself to be a Krill spy, and a Krill vessel shows up in orbit in front of the Orville, and Mercer is able to tell Bortus, after Alara takes out the spy, Mercer tells Bortus that they're here to take this special device and engage them. So there's a bit of a firefight with the Orville and the Krill vessel, and the crew, the landing party, makes a bolt for the shuttle, and they're intercepted when the Krill have several troops landing on the surface. And we get a bit of a action scene, firefight on the surface and in space, and we get the first of a running gag with Alara and her super strength. She rips off a door after Ed asks her to open this jar of pickles for him, which is a really fun gag that's done several times throughout the show. But they get back to the shuttle, they take off, and in the middle of the firefight, in the orbit between the Orville and the Krill ships, and they're trying to dock the shuttle, the Orville takes a pounding, and Gordon Malloy does this crazy maneuver, and the shuttle is able to dock without the assistance of a tractor beam or anything. So it's very skin of the teeth sort of thing. They just managed to pull it off. But the Orville is outmatched. The Krill have them pinned down pretty much, and the Orville has taken a heavy beating, and the commander of the Krill vessel signals them and says, "We want that device." And Ed says to Isaac, can you get the engines back online? And Ed says he'll stall. So he ends up talking to the Krill commander about their relationship with his relationship with Kelly, and everything gets to be pretty ridiculous. And then they hatch a plan to send the device on a remote shuttle. And they stick a little redwood seed on the device, and so as soon as it's activated, a giant redwood tree explodes through the ship and disables it, which is a clever little gag. I'm not really sure about the science of it, but then again, who cares? It's fun and it's entertaining. And so that's the Krill threat thwarted, and then we move on to the end of the mission when the Orville is back in space dock. And Ed and Kelly are having a sit down saying, Kelly says, "There's a new XO, a friend of mine, he can come in and I'll be out of your hair." And Ed asks her to stay. And, he thinks that their sort of relationship, obviously it's in a very bad state, but they can sort of mend it and they can become friends, and they work very well together, as was evident of this mission. So they need each other. And Kelly agrees to stay. And there's a little tag scene at the end with the Admiral from earlier on, Victor Garber, and Kelly, and it's revealed that Kelly convinced the Admiralty to give Ed this position because they were so disappointed with what had happened with him over the past year, but she stood up for him, which is an important plot point, which ties in later on in the show. So that's the first episode. A lot of fun. A lot of great humor that I'm not doing justice. So if you haven't watched this show at all, or indeed this first episode, do so. If you're a fan of Star Trek, or if you're a fan of Seth MacFarlane, or if you're a fan of both, like I am, you will love this show. It's a love letter to Star Trek, and it has Seth MacFarlane's classic humor all the way through. As far as the Orville itself as a show, this first episode doesn't really do much to set up the characters besides Ed and Kelly, who are the main two. So obviously the first episode is going to focus on them the most. We get a few little teases for characters, to develop in the future, but mostly it's focused on Ed and Kelly, and they're fantastic. So they pull you in. As a first episode, this is a perfect start for a fantastic show that has a lot of potential and does not disappoint.